Morning, everyone. We're just going to give a minute for everybody to come in, and we should get started soon. Well, I'm going to start off. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Creating and Executing a Talent Plan with Job Role Clarity. Please make sure to look out for an email after the webinar containing the slides, as well as information to register for our next webinar. Our presenter today will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. You can ask these questions throughout the webinar in the Questions tab on your sidebar on GoToWebinar. Any questions we do not get to, Connects will provide those to the speaker, and we will be distributing the entire list after the webinar to all attendees. Lastly, you will see a number of materials in your handout section on the right side. These handouts include our Connects event calendar, as well as information and white papers on our partner for today's webinar, CAI. If you have any technical issues, please send a text in the question tab or chat tab in the GoToWebinar platform, or call GoToWebinar directly at 888-646-0014. My name is John Tochi, and I manage partnerships for Connects. Connects is a leading educational partner showcasing innovative processes and technology for the GMP and validation environment. I'm happy to be here with you today for the fourth webinar in our Ops Readiness webinar series. This is our Connects calendar, and I would like to highlight our upcoming new biopharmaceutical manufacturing conference coming up in November that will provide tremendous content of real-world case studies and industry insights as to how the biopharma manufacturing industry can transform for a better future. I would like to take a minute to provide a little bit of a background on our partner today, CAI. CAI originated almost 25 years ago in 1996 with only 2 employees. Fast forward to today, and now CAI is an employee-owned company with more than 500 employees at locations all over the world. CAI strives to be a trusted partner to their clients through their offerings in a number of different areas, which include commissioning and qualification, building commissioning, process and manufacturing technologies, quality compliance and regulatory, automation and information technology, human performance, asset management and reliability, program and project management, and data center commissioning. If you'd like to learn more about CAI or inquire about their services, you can visit their website at www.caagents.com. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Harry Benson. Serving as the Global Director of Human Performance Services at CAI, Harry Benson leads a team of experienced professionals in developing and executing programs, processes, and tools with our clients to standardize and improve the performance of their people. A former nuclear-trained submarine officer, he's an expert in organizational culture and structure, along with learning solutions design and delivery with over 20 years of experience in applying current methods for organizational effectiveness with highly technical environments. His methods have driven measurable improvements for a wide range of companies. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Harry so that we can share slides and start the presentation.
All right. Well, thanks, John. And there we are.
Harry, you should have access now.
Okay, and you can hear me okay, correct?
We can, yes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for taking your time to cover this topic with me. This is part 4 of a series on operational readiness. If you haven't been present for all of the first 3 or any of the first 3, we're going to do a quick review, and it's a good review anyway for those who have, as it just reminds us of what we're here for. But today's topic is specifically in the talent planning space, and we like to center our talent planning for ourselves, our own organization, and our clients in the role-based way. So let's start with the objective of our operational readiness support, right? Basically, the objective of our operations, right, in our industry is to cross this chasm from the project mode to the run mode, right? The purpose of us being in business in this industry is, any of us, is not to create new entities, new structures, new plants, new lines. It's to actually produce and release therapies, products, solutions to make our patients' lives better, right? Well, if we don't cross that chasm properly, we'll find ourselves missing the mark and not quite getting there for quite some time, and typically in a matter of months or years before we really achieve our business objectives. In order to understand that, again, quick review for some of you, it's to understand what operational readiness is all about. What's the point here? The point is to take this spectrum across the bottom of this diagram, this life cycle of a plant, let's say, a manufacturing plant and operations, et cetera, and all the way from the capital project and testing mode into turnover or startup and into operations as a smooth process, right? As a continuum, not as a pass the keys handoff with risk. If you don't do it that way, you'll look more like the orange curve than the blue curve. The objective is the blue curve. The blue curve being prior to the dotted line is your capital project and testing phases. The middle is your startup phase, and you want that to be within the planned time and budget, AKA a vertical startup as much as possible. And then hit your stride as soon as the startup's complete. This point and this arrow are the keys, right? This point means I am producing and releasing product at the targeted volumes, at the targeted costs, consistently and sustainably, right? Whereas the orange curve shows what could, and by the way, the arrow means sustainably, right, for the long haul. The orange curve shows what often happens when not truly operational ready when the time comes to be so. So let's figure out why that is. What's the cause of that? It's really variability. And variability comes in three categories in general, right? You can break that out further, but in general, we categorize them as the 3 Ps of operational excellence, if you're familiar with that language. It's been around a long time. People, procedures, and plant. Plant includes, by the way, all of the facility systems, supply chain, et cetera, is implied in the term plant, right? So our quality systems are intended to reduce variability so that the quality of the product, of the released product, meets the necessary quality requirements. We also need to control variability for the sake of productivity and release, right, and business goals. So we need to look at operational readiness from both angles. So what does that look like from a problem statement standpoint? Well, the problem statement is we want to look like the blue, but we often look like the orange. And why is that? It's because if you look on the orange graph, these bar graphs indicate issues, right? Problems that occur a little bit before, during, and after startup that prevent us from hitting our stride. They lengthen our startup and have us miss the mark there. They cause us rework, deviation delays, maybe even batch losses or failure to even produce at all. And it takes time and energy unbudgeted to resolve those issues in a heroic way. And it feels heroic every time we get a batch out or go through month by month. Right? And that's the results from an output of released product, whereas the blue is obviously preferred. And the difference is we have taken these issues and each of these that these bar graphs represent and translated them into risks pre-startup. Now it sounds simple in theory, but who's going to do that and how? That's what we're going to get into in the talent planning. It's the who and the how, right? But keep in mind that in order to do this, you can't just have 1 or 2 people, really smart, experienced people, take this on, right? It's going to break down into work streams, people, areas of expertise. That was referred to in some of our previous webinars, and I invite you to go back and listen to the recordings and watch the recordings, on the Connects material. But we will touch on a little bit, but that process was covered there. But we are going to talk about the who and the how. So before we do that, we will have a couple polling questions. Here's the first. Let me explain it first, and then I'll ask John to bring up the poll. For those of you with startup experience, either in your existing plant, or maybe you know the history of your existing plant, or maybe in the past, how many batches do you estimate have fallen short of the mark? In other words, during and startup and in the early phases, meaning what batches lost, batches significantly delayed to where their value is diminished, or maybe even batches not produced because the startup was delayed. So for instance, we were supposed to start up in May, we ended up starting up in July. We do 4 batches a month, or should have done 4 batches a month. That would be 8 batches that we did not produce at all. And then when you add in, we lost 2, and then some other delays, mired in deviations. Now we're in answer D with that number, right? For example, right? So I'd like, John, you to bring up the polling question, and I'd like you to give me your thoughts on what you've seen. Appreciate your responses.
So we'll just give it a few minutes, or a minute at least.
Yeah, it's come up. Oh, I don't know if, can people answer that?
Yeah, I will tell you the percentages.
Oh, okay. I guess on mine I can't do it, but that's fine. I'm the speaker, so.
Give more, like 20 more seconds. All right, so what we have is 10% about 1 to 2, 50%. Actually, sorry, it changed a little bit.
That's okay.
All right, so now we have 18% 1 to 2, 45% 3 to 5, 9% 6 to 10, 18% 11 to 20, 9% more than 20.
Wow, pretty well distributed, and probably represents the sizes of your plants, the processes and the therapies that you're involved with. It makes sense, right? And in some cases, maybe batch isn't even the right term, so forgive that. I'm sure you can translate that for yourself. Thanks, John. If you want to close that, then now the individual or the collective responses that we got from this group isn't necessarily the point. What I'd like you to do is make a point to remember or jot down your answer, the answer that you gave. And the reason, is if we're going to take that number of the number of batches and combine it with this think ahead question, do you know the value of each of your batches, or the batches in that scenario that you were just thinking of? Because with those 2 pieces of information and one other, we're going to do a little exercise later on to talk about what we need to do to make sense of our plan for staffing and talent. All right. So jot down those numbers somewhere or get them in your head, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So as I said, today's focus along this journey of operational readiness and the 3 Ps, plant, procedure, and process, and people, excuse me, is the people focus, right? People readiness. And we look at people readiness. Here's a diagram that shows, at a high level, what has to happen to have people readiness for operational readiness. Have your people ready for full-scale operations with consistency and sustainability. And you'll notice they're color-coded to represent ownership. Who is responsible for the areas? So in the dark blue, both at the beginning of the diagram, trying to get my pointer back up here. Okay, I've lost my pointer, that's okay. The dark blue at the beginning and at the end is for site leadership, departmental leadership, etc. The light blue is for your system owners or SMEs, subject matter experts. Right? More on that in a minute, but let's first talk about this first 4 blocks that site leadership is responsible for to ready the people for full operations. You have to set site objectives, your production objectives, cost targets, metrics that you're going to track, etc. Right? Particularly those metrics that will be visible to the whole organization. And then process map. Now, when I say process map, I'm not talking you necessarily at this point have a process engineer getting into the details and mapping this out in a gory detail yet. If you have that, great, but you need to take it up quite a bit, and we'll touch on that in a minute, and the reason for doing that. So you have a process map, a general process of how we're going to achieve those site objectives, and then break down the work structure a little bit more. Breakdown structure into the tasks that need to be performed. Now that one may be deferred to the SMEs and system owners if leadership isn't quite prepared to do that at this point in the cycle, or maybe they don't even have the expertise in certain work streams. That's okay, right? So that one's debatably in the wrong place. The last one is your SMEs and your system owners are defined. Where do we need them? And those roles get filled, right? That's the responsibility of senior leadership and site leadership and departmental leadership first. So let's dive into those a little bit. So the first one is meeting the objective. What is the objective? And I'm sure you can all relate to maybe both of these scenarios at some points in your career, right? Do people really know what we're going to work for every day? What success means to us as a group? Because otherwise I can't really determine how my role contributes to the greater good, and my work has less meaning and I'm less inspired, right? So, and I find myself on the right side. Hopefully you're not there. Hopefully your staff isn't there. If they are, do some soul searching, figure that out, and get that back on track, right? Enough said. But with that objective set, then I can say, okay, what's the general process for achieving that objective? Now you might look at this and say, okay, a third grader wrote this. This is not a process map. I completely agree, right? All this is an assembly of the work streams, if you want to call them that, the areas, departments, and the general, very high level manufacturing process in this case, right? That's what this is. Is this appropriate? Definitely not for the whole organization, but it is appropriate for this step, because what we're trying to focus on in this one is what experts do I need to move forward? Where do I need expertise? So if I've got this new therapy, I'm this scientist that came up with this new thing, I got a staff of very smart people, but we really don't know how to take this to operations. And we've seen this, right? And it's okay. That's how do I do this? Or I'm a CDMO, I got a new line coming on. This is an area that I really haven't explored at this site before. I'm gonna need some experts in certain areas, right? That I just don't have right now, right? Or maybe I do have, but they're working on other stuff and I've got to assign some new ones, right? That's the purpose of this very simple diagram in this case, right? Taking it a step further, departmental leadership, somebody needs to take it maybe a step further first before we really bring on those SMEs and system owners, right? And that might be, and the purpose here, a little bit of the same, but a step further. We also need to figure out where to inject and collaborate across departments. So in this case, this process map is showing upstream manufacturing, great. Where in the upstream manufacturing process do I need to make sure I have a handshake with QC, and the expectations of QC's processes marry with my expectations for manufacturing? If I don't take the time to do that as a departmental head and share that with my counterpart in the other areas of the organization, then I'm going to have silos. I'm going to have disparity and ambiguity and of ownership, misalignment, maybe even issues and problems that I can't overcome. Right. So that's the purpose of this, right? Not at the gory level, not deep in the task level necessarily, to where I'm assigning staff to roles yet. We'll get to that. But this helps with that cross connection. Other process maps. So this is just upstream manufacturing. We have a whole supply chain process or several processes within supply chain, maintenance practice workflows, batch record review and batch record release and batch release process is a QA process that would be mapped at this level. And you'd figure out where I need the other departments to be involved. Now that I have that, I have to say, where do I need experts? In my staffing and talent plan, where do I need expertise? Because those experts are not just so I have smart people around. They are going to have a very specific role in this effort of operational readiness that we're going to get to in a minute. And that's that light blue on that diagram that we'll come back to. But in deciding where I need expertise, I need to look at the complexity of the new process, the new build, the new line, the new site, the scale, my current level of comfort and expertise in those spaces. So it might range from a new train in an existing plant and its processes that we know pretty well. I just might need a few more experts to make sure someone's got ownership. But I know kind of what's needed. Great, I might only need 4 or 5 as system owners to own those processes. On the other hand, maybe it's a brand new site, complex project. I'm going to need a full suite of system owners to remember what the objective of those system owners is to take those known risks or issues and turn them in and translate them into risks. And I need people with experience to do that in their specific work streams. So this diagram shows example work streams that might be considered in a more complex environment or a higher end environment, larger scale environment. These might be some numbers you come up with of system owners. Are they exactly right? Can we debate number of in engineering versus manufacturing, whatever? Sure, that's not the point. The point is you've defined where I need expertise. So with that discussion, I'd like to bring up polling question number 2. For the current site or a previous site, if that's in your mind, how many system owners would ideally meet the site's needs for operational readiness in a new train or a new site or whatever? Again, think back in history if you have to, or think of your current application. How many system owners make sense? And we'll get into the role of the system owner. I could have asked this question later to give you some clarity, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out there now. If you don't mind, John, bring that question up.
Certainly.
All right.
Give it like 20 seconds and we'll.
Sure. And just to be clear on definitions, system owners by definition are SMEs, subject matter experts, but they have very specific responsibilities beyond what a subject matter expert has. So being an SME is a prerequisite to being a system owner, if done right.
And so far we have about 20% less than 3, 30% 3 to 5, and 50% 6 to 10.
Interesting. Okay. Kind of surprised that the low end of that number compared to some of the numbers we saw in the first polling question, but okay. Interesting. Thank you. Thanks, John. So moving on then. So by the way, remember we have jotted down how many batches were lost or mired or what have you that we missed. We short fell on. We have the amount or the value of each batch, and now we have a number that we think is ideal of system owners that we might need in our talent plan. We're going to take those 3 numbers in a minute and do something with them. Before I do, let's do a little bit of analysis of what a system owner's role is. I referred to it a little bit earlier. The priorities are down at the last line there, the last section under the numbers. But the success factors are this: they have to have sufficient experience in the specific work stream, right? Or work streams, right? If you can combine work streams, certain areas of expertise, and minimize the front end burden, cost burden of experts, that's fine, right? If you can do it effectively. Where the risk comes in, if you do that too much, you might lose number 2, which is focus, right? And you might not have sufficient expertise to actually take all the issues and translate them into risk pre-startup, right? Because they haven't necessarily been there with regard to, let's say, EHS, or with regard to the IT challenges or the automation challenges. We might think they have some experience there. You just want to be careful, because if that's a cornerstone of your processes and your success in operations, someone better be there who's been there before, right? So just give that some thought. The other criteria or success factors are the focus and the authority, meaning they are granted focus and authority, not it's some sideline collateral duty of 15% of their job, right? This has got to be their focus during the readiness phase. Now, post-readiness, by the way, this is a readiness success factors. Post-readiness, we know there will be other roles for the system owner. System owner will be doing troubleshooting, change controls, process improvements, coaching and advising and training improvements, all that good stuff, right? And more, right? Advising engineering, advising validation, et cetera. That's great. But in the readiness phase, this is their focus. And they also need the organizational support. And again, we'll touch on that toward the end of the presentation and give you some tools for that. But what they're going to be doing is they're going to be building, executing, and adjusting the procedures, the workflows, the staffing plans, and the qualifications and training content for that staff for each of the work streams they own to make sure they are running those risks to ground before they become issues. That's their job description. So before we get into the how, because we are going to talk about how and what the output looks like of that role, let's talk about the justification, because somebody's got to justify this headcount that you're proposing that you hire well before startup. And how far before startup do you look, right? In order to do that, that takes some business discussion, right? Otherwise, we're just going to do the best we can with the smart people we have. And that fails. I'm just going to say it. It doesn't work. So the applicability, so we have two ends of the spectrum. The very simple process I described, here's what it might look like, small focus site, maybe a new line that's of known processes or whatever. Maybe you don't need that many SMEs and subject matter experts as working as system owners. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 6, whatever, somewhere in there, right? And they can combine work streams and responsibilities, that's fine. If we use the US Bureau of Labor Statistics data from 2021, total compensation for that level of expertise might be 125K. Use your own data at your site. I used logical benchmarks for this, and that's per year, right? That's an annual total compensation. And as a result, if we average that to, let's say we've got 5 system owners a year in advance, that's 625K, right? Now, the question is, do I need to go a year in advance? Well, for this scenario, maybe not. Maybe 9 months, maybe 6 months, whatever. I wouldn't go too much less, right? Or you're going to find yourself strapped for time and you're not going to be ready. And we'll touch on that. So 6 months would really be pushing it. You might go 2 years if it's complex enough, like on this side of things. So a medium to large site, unfamiliar processes, et cetera. You might, in the example that I showed on that workstream diagram, we had 15 system owners, SMEs serving as system owners. Do you need that? Remember, these are work streams across the organization, just to be clear. Maybe I should have clarified that when I asked that question earlier. It's not just in manufacturing and engineering, for example, which a lot of people tend to think about. You need system owners in QA, QC, EHS, supply chain, the works, right? So just keep that in mind. So if that number is 15, how do I justify that? Well, again, use your own site's numbers. Again, 125 per on average, according to that data, that benchmark data, and we're at 1.9 million for a year's worth of system owner work at the site. Now you might say, how in the world am I going to justify that to hire those folks in parallel with capital project? Well, it's as simple as this in my mind, right? The cost, which is either, in the 2 cases I gave you, is either, man, I can't get my pointer to work, I'm sorry, is either 625K or 1.9 million, either one, or something that you came up with your own numbers. That's the cost on the numerator of the equation, the denominator, of course, being the value per batch that you wrote down or captured in your head during the earlier polling question. And what that gives you is a number of batches, gained batches, the net additional batches that you will get from running those issues to ground earlier as risks, right, to break even. So in other words, after 2 batches in that simple scenario, I've paid for my investment. After 3 batches, excuse me, 2.4, so that's 3 batches in the complex scenario. If your numbers are different, by the way, I use the value of the batch of 400K, 800K, you'll use your real numbers, whatever that is that you wrote down or put in your head. And by batch gain, we're talking about batches that, if you remember how many batches you think you lost or fell short or never produced because of the issues during and after startup. That's the number that's going to give you this return, right? And you compare that number with this required number that you get from this equation, and you've got a pretty good case. That's one way to do it. You can also do payback period, meaning number of weeks or months that you expect to recoup, post startup, that you expect to recoup that cost. I bring that up because obviously the business side of things is something that not everybody's comfortable with. They might shake their head and say, wow, we need all these SMEs, but they struggle to make the business case. So now, what does the SMA do? Well, I touched on it earlier, but here are the specifics that I recommend that they spend their time on to prepare for people readiness, right? For the people readiness, here's specifically what they're going to do. They're going to pull together, they're going to create and pull together the SOPs and other documents, the procedures and so forth, right? They're going to map the process to procedure. I'll show you some examples of what that looks, an example of what that looks like. They're going to assign and coach, writers and oversee the production of those SOPs, right? If they aren't writing them themselves, they certainly need to be the authority and the reviewer technically. They're going to do the same process of mapping the process to roles. Who's going to do these the steps of this process, which is why you need that work breakdown structure. So that work breakdown structure may have been produced earlier or may be produced by the subject matter expert system owner. That's fine either way. And then you're going to draft job descriptions from that. Now, are they experts in drafting job descriptions? Maybe not. A little bit of training, they can do that. It's not that hard. But the key with the system owner needs to own is what are their priorities? What are the priorities of the staff that I'm hiring in that particular role and that particular role? And then they also have to have the sufficient numbers to meet the process objectives, the numbers of batches, the shift rotations, et cetera, right? They also have to align with the other system owners. And what I recommend is a regular cadence of community of system owners. And those system owners overlap their plans into a master plan. Now that was covered, as I said, in the last session in part 3 by my colleagues, and they did a great job of that. So you want to essentially have that master plan so there's no conflict, there's clear collaboration with each other's workstream processes. They want to qualify the staffs for the role, so which means they need to build that qualification path and training content. Now that probably takes a handshake and close work with your training department, HR, whoever at the site they're responsible for. If you're a small site and you don't have those resources, then they're probably laying out the qual paths for those different roles, maybe with a little help here and there on the administration. And then they have to execute those qual schedules, build a schedule, who's going to qualify when as the staff comes into the site. And then, of course, the last one can't be ignored. You do have to train a backup. Everybody's always going to be training their backup. Who's the backup? Who's going to be an SME that could be my next system owner in this space so that I can move on to other things? And that ensures business continuity of knowledge. So here's some outputs to consider. Here's a tool that we like at CAI that could serve you well, and we do this for sites. Here we've taken the work breakdown structure of a particular process step, the process step being line setup in this case. Fairly simple process, but there's a work breakdown structure that's shown vertically in the first column. The second column are the procedures and the qualifications to perform each of those tasks. Following that is what's the duration of it. Instead of operators, it should say roles. What roles do we need to fulfill that? Because the roles may not be operators, they may be maintenance techs, they may be QA, they may be other things. So keep that in mind. Batch record steps. So this is also a harmonization document, right? In this case, for instance, we can see that the batch record, step 1 moves to step 3 and step 2 if you follow the work breakdown structure workflow logically, which makes you scratch your head and go, maybe something's out of whack. Maybe we need to address the batch record, which gets back to the authority of the system owner. The system owner needs to be able to submit that change, obviously with appropriate reviews and so forth. So that'll help lay out what procedures are needed and documentation are needed to execute the process. Now, what people are needed. So here is another diagram, another output that we like to use. And this is showing the who, what, and when, right? This is one run, if you will, in this case. So a run, a manufacturing run, requires these functions, and obviously this isn't everything, this is an example. But operators, maintenance techs, QA, micro, et cetera. And what are they going to perform, the process steps, and the timeline to do so, right? And then of course down here are the detailed, work breakdown structure, the tasks that are actually performed. Again, that could be mapped to SOPs. So at this point, and to qualifications, by the way. At this point now, I really have the beginning of a production schedule. I can take this, and this is a scheduler's dream, because now I can say, okay, where can I crunch? Where can I share resources? These two people are ready to start the next batch and prepare for that next run, and I can optimize my schedule, my time, right? This also tells me how many people I need, because I can say, all right, my objectives for production are this many batches or vials or whatever per month, per X period of time. How many shifts do I need to run? And that will tell me how many people I need to hire in each of the functions or roles to the left. Therefore, I can build a staffing plan, right? Now, the staffing plan in this case shows time windows. I'd like to have these people in the green band. Worst case, it's the red block. I have to have them by that point. Now, that red block cannot be 2 weeks before startup for any role, by the way, because you always have to work backwards. You have to have you have to be fully staffed well before that, right? Let's face it. I've seen it, and I'm sure you have, where your people newly introduced to a role, either they were shifted from the other side of the plant or they were new hires or whatever. Doesn't matter how much experience they have to be trained and ready for that role and qualified for that role, right? Because they haven't seen your process or they're not familiar with it, and they have to qualify. And if everybody's doing the read and understand of SOPs at the 11th hour, sorry, that's not qualification, and you're going to have issues. So you need to work backwards, proper onboarding, proper qualification, allow for that time. I won't spend any more time on that, because in the 2 sessions from now is a whole session on training and qualification of staff and supervisors. Next month we're going to talk about effective procedure writing. So both of those are part of the series. By the way, defining roles clearly is very important. I just want to, since this is about talent planning, this is one of the biggest things you can do to impact performance of your staff, right? The last 2 columns in particular, process control and performance excellence. If everybody's clear, role clarity is what it's all about. If I'm clear on my role and I'm clear on the site goals, and I can connect the dots between how I contribute to that, then I'm inspired to do good work, to control my process, to be qualified, and improving and continuous improvement in my knowledge and skill, right? Obviously, good, well-defined roles help with organizational planning, budgeting, et cetera, like we talked about. And of course, they help with the recruiting and the staff qualification and career development, goes without saying. So the last piece, which I won't spend a lot of time on in this session, is, remember I said they also have to have the organizational support. They support, the company has to support their success, the system owners and those in the departments that are trying to achieve operational readiness. What does that look like? Well, there's a handout, as John pointed out, there's 4 handouts, and I'll touch on those in a minute, and John can remind everybody where to find them. But there's a handout in particular that goes into detail, some detail about each of these workplace factors that impact performance. These are the top factors that impact performance on the job of your staff and supervisors. I've talked a fair amount on the first 2, alignment of purpose and mission, priority, and all that, and then role clarity. The rest of them, I'm not going to touch on today too much. We do have an article that serves as a handout here that you can refer to. It's the 3rd one down, and it's an article specifically explaining these. They are all part of a talent plan. Those have to be in place to make people inspired to perform, successful in their roles, et cetera. And when you bring all that together, you have something like this. Now, there's also a white paper posted as a handout. It's the second one down in your handout list that accompanies this presentation, and it has this material in it. So I don't expect you to necessarily, frantically write this down or whatever if you're interested. But when I help organizations build talent plans, both organizations I used to work directly for and organizations I serve now in this capacity, I start with this and the slide before. Those are the elements that make an effective talent plan. Right? And so if I get all this right and I get those experts in place to mitigate the issues in the form of risk pre-startup, I'm set up for this kind of output, which is that blue curve hitting consistent and sustainable volumes of product production and release at sustainable costs, and therefore achieving operational readiness on the people side of things. As I said, next month, next session will be on procedures, and we've already talked a good bit about plant and so forth, but more allusion to that later. So with that, I'd like to open up to any questions. John?
Well, thank you, Harry. That was a great presentation. We will look at if anybody has any questions. We're going to have a Q&A for right now. I'll just pause for a few moments to see if we have any. As Harry mentioned, we have the handout section if you would like to look at it. There's a white paper in there that Harry had written, as well as a blog situation, which really outlines pretty much the presentation, what Harry was talking about. And we will just keep it there for questions. If anybody has questions, we'll pause for a minute and a half.
Yeah, and I need to correct myself. The first one is a schedule of Connect's combined webinars. The second one is actually this slide deck in PDF form. The third one is the accompanying white paper for this presentation that has the whole talent planning bullet points and all that kind of stuff, and some explanation. And then the last one is the explanation of that workplace factors diagram for those who are interested in that material.
I'd also like to remind people, if anybody has any questions regarding the presentation or the PowerPoint slides, you can either reach out to Harry directly, or Connect will, provide them to Harry and get them answered.
Thanks, John.
Harry, I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, but we can. Let me see the chat.
I do want to thank everybody for their time. And if more questions come in, that's fine. But I do appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day to cover this important topic.
Harry, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to say before we head out here? If you have time,
I think I've given most of my thoughts already, but thank you, John. Again, I'm happy to support. If anybody has any direct questions, you're welcome to contact me through Connects or directly for the slide. Thanks, John.
All right, Harry, I think we'll probably wrap it up here, if that's all right with you.
Of course. Absolutely.
We at Connects would like to thank everyone for attending today's creating and executing a talent plan with job role clarity. Please make sure to look out for an email after the webinar containing the slides, as well as information and the handouts to register for our next webinar. Any questions that we did not get to today, we will forward to Harry. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up email from us for these questions and other materials. Thank you again, Harry, for the great presentation, and thank you everyone for attending and taking the time out of your day. I hope everyone has a lovely day, and Harry, we will be in contact as well.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Harry. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.